last years of the 19th century, that human affairs were being watched from the timeless worlds of space. No one could have dreamed we were being scrutinized as someone with a microscope studies creatures that swarm and multiply in a drop of water. Few men even considered the possibility of life on other planets. And yet, across the gulf of space, minds immeasurably superior to ours regarded this Earth with envious eyes. And slowly and surely, they drew their plans against us.
Broadcasting live
from a tiny studio somewhere in North America.
This is Dark Matters Radio Live. And now I give you your host,
the silverback of ufology.
Here's Don Ecker.
Well, salutations and greetings far and wide. Welcome back to another brand new edition of Dark Matters Radio right here on KGRA Digital Broadcasting, the only place you can get it. Now, I got a little explanation about last week. Last week, we had scheduled who turned out to be tonight's guest because we had to cancel literally at the last moment. We had, with my co-host Gerry and with Mark, we had some technical difficulties. Gerry went through a tremendous storm there where they had tornadoes, everything else, lost their internet. Mark had some unavoidable things he had to take care of at the last minute. So I called Bill up and I said, man, maybe we ought to do a best of show and see if our guest can make it tonight. Well, by golly, she did. Ms. Linda Zimmermann, a noted, well-respected researcher and investigator, all the way back on the East Coast in New York. And before we get into the show, let me tell you a little bit about Linda. She is a former research scientist and an award-winning author of over 30 books, not only on science, but history, the paranormal, and she even delves a little bit into science fiction. Okay? She, of course, has been a mainstay on media across television and radio throughout the country, and she's spoken at some very prestigious places. I'm not going to go into the whole thing, but take my word for it, she is on the money. Now, she has been a noted researcher in one area of the country where there's been tremendous sightings of anomalous objects, even cryptids that have run out. And I'm talking about the Hudson Valley in New York. We're going to get into all of that. But of course, also with us is Mr. Gerry Kissell, as usual, when he's not weathering storms and what have you.
Hey,
Mr.
I moved
Mark
to
Center.
Spain. I moved to Spain for better internet.
Yes. Your internet in Missouri ain't that great anyway. I got news
No,
for
it's
you.
not.
Pal. But then we also have Mr. Mark Center, as always. Mark tries to keep us all honest. He's not afraid to jump into the middle of it. Am I correct, Mark?
You are correct.
There you go. And of course, our special guest, Ms. Linda Zimmermann. Linda, welcome to the show. It's a stink pleasure to have you here. How the heck are you doing?
I'm doing good. Thanks for inviting me. Looking forward.
Well, you're more than welcome. Now, with that being said, let's go back to New York. Now, I believe this is the first time you've ever been on Dark Matters Radio. You've been across, of course, many platforms, but probably a lot of my audience may not be that familiar with your work. How did you become, and I'm sure you've heard this 1,000 or 10,000 times, how did you become involved in this crazy field anyway? Now, look, I myself have been in this field, and it scares me to even say that, but closing in on damn near 40 years. And I often wake up in the morning and ask myself, Linda, what in the hell is wrong with me? But, be that as it may, how about you?
Nothing I had ever planned on doing. As you mentioned, I was a research scientist for a medical diagnostics company, and I enjoyed writing. And when the company closed, I decided to just try to be a writer, which fortunately was successful. And I was writing about a variety of topics and living in the Hudson Valley as I had my entire life. And it seemed like whatever I gave a lecture on, what you pick the topic, history, science, someone would come up to me afterwards and tell me their UFO story. And I'm like, okay, that's interesting, but why are you telling me this? And they said, you should do a book. You should look into it. And so many sightings over so many years. I'm thinking, it's normal, right? This many UFO sightings is normal because it happens all the time here. But the more I heard from people, I realized it was even so far beyond what I had imagined. So many people over so many years. And the 1980s was the big wave, but that was just part of it. I've charted cases going back to the 1800s. There was a huge wave in 1908 to 1910. And it just, it's one of those rabbit holes that you get in and it just keeps pulling you deeper and deeper. So,
well, when I really decided to jump in head first into this pool was in the latter 1980s, but I've always had an interest in the subject. I was first really exposed to it from the works of people like Donald Keyhoe, of course, of NICAP, a tremendously gifted investigator, researcher, and speaker on the topic. People like Ivan Sanderson, Richard Hall. And in 1966, I myself and several friends had a dramatic UFO sighting while on a day-long hunting trip in my home area, which is central western Pennsylvania, around December, I guess it would have been the 11th or 12th, because that was generally when deer season began. And at that time, everybody and their brother, hunted. It was so popular that even the schools, if the opening day of deer season happened during a school day, the schools would close for the day. That's how popular it was. But we had this sighting, and I'll tell you, I went home. I was excited. I was dancing on air. I told my parents about it, and I was positive it would make the local news. Of course, not a word. And later, when I did get involved into the subject, I did an intensive, approximately 6-month-long research dive into it. And that part of the country, New York, Pennsylvania, Ohio, New Jersey, West Virginia, were literally at that point being flown over everywhere by whatever these things were. Now, as we all know, anybody that's done any time in this field at all, for years, local media, national media, unless they had no option, were loath to even mention the subject. Now, with all of that being said, one of the books that I read in the 80s was Night Siege by J. Allen Hynek, Bob Pratt, and Philip Imbrogno. And at the time that I read it, I found it an intensely deep look into what was happening. Were you aware at that time about what they were talking about, these gigantic anomalous objects that even ended up shutting down major highways as they overflew it? Did you know about that in your local and regional news? Did they talk about it?
Oh, yes. You couldn't help but know about it for years and years. And I can't tell you how many people at the time I knew saw something. And I had my own sighting in July of 88 of a enormous V-shaped craft with huge rounded white lights silently gliding. I get goosebumps every time I remember that. It was, you knew you were just looking at something that wasn't normal, that probably wasn't ours. So
were you fearful?
No, I tried following it. I went after it, but it went over a wooded area and I lost sight of it. So, you couldn't help but know. A lot of the coverage was mocking that, oh, what were they drinking? Or more people, mass hysteria, more people are seeing it. But the more it went on, and like you said, closing down highways, hundreds of people stopping on a road, on a major highway to get out and look, as many as estimated 5,000 witnesses a night. You could have it once, twice, 3 times a week for 5 or 6 years. I always compare it to the Phoenix Lights, which was an amazing one night. I always say that was a typical day of the week for the Hudson Valley for 6 years. So you couldn't help but know what was going on.
Now, something that I've noticed in recent years, and when I say recent years, I'm talking the last 10 to 15 years, more and more people are reporting, along with sightings of anomalous unknown objects, what appear to be cryptid creatures. What about New York? Have you found that to be the case more often than not?
No, there are cryptid sightings, but I can think of maybe one unconfirmed where a cryptid was seen with some strange lights in the woods. Otherwise, I'm not saying they're not connected, but it's not like there's a UFO and there's a Bigfoot running across the street. We have cryptids, we have UFOs, but I haven't really come across any cases where there's a direct correlation.
Gentlemen, do you have anything you want to chime in on?
Well, you said that there's not very much activity after that one viewing, but I've heard that there's a lot of sightings there in Hudson Valley.
Oh, yeah. To this day, there are still a lot. Not as
it's nothing like the one you saw. Is that what you meant?
Nothing like the 1980s, where it was hundreds of thousands of people over the span of 6 years. But I'm still getting reports.
How big was this
all
thing?
The time. I would have to say, they say football field size. That was the tip. Mm-hmm. I would say it was V-shaped, point in front, from back to back, had to be the width of a football field. And the lights were just absolutely huge. I don't quite know what to compare them to, but rounded, like half of a bowl shaped. And they were very bright, but they
Were they
didn't.
illumination lights or were they lights from within the vehicle?
They were illumination lights, but they didn't propagate to the ground. They didn't light up the ground beneath them, which was that I could see, which was very odd because they were huge and bright, but it wasn't lighting up the field and the woods that it went over, which was odd. But I'd heard that several times, many times since, that huge bright lights, but don't shine down.
Tell me, Linda, did did the local authorities, in the guise of police helicopters, did they end up showing up to see what was going on, or perhaps even the state National Guard? Did they display any interest in this?
The local police departments, absolutely, because they had their own sightings, and there's a couple of great cases where local police were chasing these things, and the next jurisdiction would join in. So to this day, many of the law enforcement officers will swear to their stories and cases.
And they're not alone when they're doing this. So these would be considered corroborated sightings.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And as they went on, so many police departments were getting swamped with calls. So no other call, no car accident or robbery calls could come in.
All the tensions on this, right?
Yeah. So they were told, whoever calls, just tell them it's a flight of Cessnas or ultralights flying in. It's a group flying in formation. And actually, there were groups who started doing that. And that was the blanket excuse. If you saw a massive triangle hovering over your head for 20 minutes at treetop level, you were told you saw a formation of ultralights. It was a very successful disinformation campaign. In fact, just in the last couple of years, I've spoken to two witnesses who were related to some of the pilots who did this, and somebody in the FAA would call them and tell them where a sighting just occurred. And they would either, if they could, run to their planes and follow the same course that night. Or there was an interesting case where a family saw something one night, and the next night, following the same path at like the same 8:32 p.m., they knew exactly when and where it was. They would get in their planes and follow that exact path. So creating reasonable doubt, saying, oh, no, well, that was our planes. And
ultralights at that time of the day would have been illegal to fly.
Absolutely. After night. Yes.
Right. That would have been, and if that had actually been for real, I'm sure local authorities, or the FAA for that matter, would have looked into it, and it would not have been that hard. And I'm speaking from the guise of an investigator, to track down who some of those people were, and then they would be liable for penalties.
But they weren't. The FAA was tipping them off, wanting them to fly. I had a group of firefighters who, it's night, they're doing a practice, and they see, they can hear that they're ultralights, but they're trying to fly in formation. It's pitch black. They turned the big spotlights on them, saw they were individual ultralights. They scattered and took off. They knew where they was Stormville Airport. They knew where they were taking off. They knew where they were landing. They were even calling themselves the Martians. And they even had on the menu in the lunch, and they had a diner counter there, Martian special, Martian burger special. They were just making fun of it. And the FAA knew, the state police knew. I have a list of names who the pilots were, and nothing was ever done because they wanted them to do it, to create this disinformation.
Did you ever speak about that or write about it?
Oh, yeah. It's in my book. I have a whole chapter I have been doggedly pursuing. I have spoken to children of these pilots who are, of course, now grown. No pilot ever had the courage to really come forward since. One did talk about it at the time, saying, oh, we're just having fun. Leave us alone. We're not trying to hurt anybody. But they're causing traffic jams, and they finally stopped when a pregnant woman went off the road because she thought it was a UFO coming down towards her. And then they realized, they started getting threats, and they thought, oh, well, we're gonna end up in jail. So that's when it finally stopped. But it's an amazing chapter in American history where there was government complicity in creating hoaxes to give plausible deniability for all of these major sightings.
Well, there are authorities above the FAA. All right. And I'm talking about in terms of the government. Do you think, or have you researched into who may have given the green light to the FAA to proceed like that?
Your guess is as good as mine. I don't know. It had to be someone in great authority, because, as you said, this was illegal. It was dangerous. And really, they're just lucky that pilots didn't get killed or somebody on the ground didn't get killed. It was a dangerous, stupid game they were playing.
How long, Linda, did that go on? Do you know?
Years, several years. Yeah, it didn't start until after the original sightings started. And then it, once these sightings were on a regular basis, these two flying groups began.
Now, this is completely out of left field. This got nothing to do with that, okay? But in your bio, I read something that piqued my curiosity, and it involved you writing science fiction. Now, I wrote and had published a horror novel. And I've done a lot of writing. Well, I was the director of research for UFO Magazine. I've done a ton of writing, most of it, unfortunately, for free. But I was curious what your science fiction was about.
I had most of my science fiction I wrote before I started researching UFOs. One of them was a futuristic baseball science fiction because I'm a huge Mets fan and a baseball fan. So I wrote that. And then another one was again, futuristic, almost like the Roman Empire, what it would have been, how society would have been years in the future. With that same structure. And then talking about horror, I wrote a zombie trilogy. So,
oh, really?
Yes, love those zombies.
Well, I really get off on good science fiction or even good fantasy. And years ago, I guess it would have been maybe in the late 70s, early 80s. I didn't write it. I read a book titled The Far Arena. And that book grabbed me like nothing in a long time. Basically, what it was about, a Roman gladiator, a very wealthy man, a free man. He had been a free man, not a slave. Okay, but he was incredibly gifted. in the gladiatorial games. A series of events happened where he was seen as a threat to the then emperor. He was taken by force, taken by soldiers up to the northern territories, which was above Germany because Rome, of course, had all that area then, and was given a poisoned drink and dumped into the ocean, which was ice covered. Well, he ended up being encased in ice. And 2,000 years later, his body was discovered by an oil exploration team in that area. And they brought him back. He was incredibly well preserved. And through a series of what ifs, they tried to revive this frozen man, which in fact they achieved. Because of the poison drink that he had drank, it basically, the cells in his body did not do what normally they would have done, which frozen and they burst and what have you. That didn't happen. This was basically like an antifreeze solution in his body. Okay, it sounds crazy, but it was a fascinating read. And this guy suddenly is confronted by civilization 2,000 years later. Can you imagine that? A hell of a read.
So in Hudson Valley, what sort of response did the valley itself, the people, the location experience when we had all the drones a few months ago?
Oh, there was mild to intense hysteria. Everybody, people who never look up at the sky were, running around outside looking at these drones, and a lot of fear. There was a lot of speculation. They were looking for a rogue nuke, that they were Chinese and they were poisoning us. I mean, you name it. There was a lot of fear, and they were everywhere. I had one go over my backyard. It was huge, about not quite the size of a car, but it sounded like a truck going by. It was, I wasn't fearful of it, but it certainly was unusual, and I've never heard a suitable explanation. Have you?
No, and evidently I am to assume that after it died down, by and large, or we'd be seeing citizen auditors, let's call them, still posting this stuff. It died completely, which is interesting, right? It's there, right. It causes a big kerfluffle, and then it's done.
Well, the new administration that was then coming into office said that they were going to find out what in the heck was going on, because the last administration, and I, by the way, never believed this for a hot second, said they had no idea what it was. Well, in today's day and age, okay, with something like that, if the government didn't have a handle on it, well, we'd all be in even more trouble than we are today. And they would have started to shoot these things down, I would think, wouldn't you? Yet that never happened. And then when the current administration did come out with something, it wasn't to my satisfaction. How about you guys?
No.
Yeah, it was a vague, they were, approved flights. But
by the FAA.
Yeah, but not by whom and for what purpose. So yeah. I don't know.
Back to the early stuff in the valley, in the Hudson Valley. And I'm just throwing it out there. I'm not trying to be a conspiracy guy or something. I just don't know. So that went on from 83 or 1982-ish to 84-ish or something like that. The big flap, let's call it. The Catskills are 90 minutes away, and a year after the bigger flap happened, Stryber says that he had his thing pretty close, right? I mean, it's within the area.
It's not far from Pine Bush, which was one of the hottest of the hot spots.
I've never heard him say that there was any connection at all, but in your research and what you've done, do you have any view of what may or may not went down with him and the location that it went down with him?
The location is very active, and I've talked to somebody who lives in his house now and who has talked to the neighbors, and they said, oh, stuff was going on all the time. So it wasn't, he just happened to be the one to write a book about it. So that area was very active, and the Hudson Valley wave, I put it at basically 83 to 89. Okay. So his events happened right in the middle of all that.
Tell me, Linda, during the time that J. Allen Hynek, before he passed on, and Robert Pratt, Bob Pratt, did you ever get a chance to either meet or speak with them about that?
Unfortunately, no, I did not. I was aware of it. I had my own experience, but I was, working in a lab at that point and wasn't chasing UFOs. Unfortunately, right. I wish I had started.
Well, yeah, unfortunately for me too, because Hynek passed on before I became involved. Donald Kehoe passed on. A lot of those guys from the original days back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, I guess were all leaving the stage at that time. Mm-hmm. But their work, of course, survives.
Yes. Yeah. He came to the Hudson Valley because he was fascinated by the Hudson Valley wave, and he was very impressed. He thought it was one of the best group of cases he had ever encountered.
Hynek, you mean?
Yes.
Well, I've often wondered about Hynek. Now, I had been aware of J. Allen Hynek since the infamous Hillsdale College swamp gas explanation back in '65. And I was very fascinated and did some armchair digging at the time of the Condon Committee, all right, which I think we all can agree today was nothing but a government Air Force whitewash. But Hynek basically originally was bought and paid for by the United States Air Force as their civilian astronomy consultant. They were paying him, and at the time, it was a princely sum of about $5,000 a year to be on call for Project Blue Book in the Air Force, okay? And Hynek never had his epiphany until after he left official Air Force as the official Air Force consultant. Now, in the late 80s, very, very early 1990s, in my guise as the director of research for UFO Magazine, I spoke to somebody who I'm not going to name their name right now, but they were in a position to know. This individual knew not only J. Allen Hynek, he knew Jacques Vallée. As a matter of fact, he knew all the principals of that era. And he told me, okay, in a conversation, that he knew for an ironclad fact that Hynek and Vallée were still sending in reports to the Air Force on this topic years after they were allegedly disassociated from the Air Force or anything else officially to do with UFOs.
You know, like
Do you have any
Smith?
feelings on that?
I wouldn't be surprised. Once in their pocket, I think pretty much
It's the same
always
thing with the
beholden to.
Once you're the head of the CIA, you're always part of that crowd, like Bush. You're always in it. Yeah, it's unless you do something that pisses them off, I can't see you being removed, someone being removed.
Well,
and there's the flip side of it too, right? Because you have Pope, who, I'm not saying that he hasn't done some work and things, but he was positioning himself as something that he wasn't. And when he was called out on it, he at least backed up from that and kind of tried to make it right. I guess would be the best way to put it. He's going to be at Pine Bush again, right? I met him. I talked to him. Got some great stories and stuff, but I think most people would agree he was trying to position himself as something of more importance in his role with the government in the UK than he actually was. So it goes both ways, right?
oh yeah.
Hey, there was one thing, again, I need to throw it out there for the listeners and myself. You're aware, I'm sure, of the two incidences that happened at the same time for the Phoenix lights. The lights that blink out in the V shape, and then whatever went over those people, that giant thing that had nothing to do with that. And then a couple of 3 years ago or so, a manufacturer of V-shaped airships was able to go public because they were doing this for the Army or for the military, and fairly new technology, I think, based on old tech. And these things are gigantic. I mean, you're looking at like football size some of these things. So I throw it out to the table. I'm wondering, by misidentification, since we've seen the photos and we know the company that was making these things, how these sort of fit in with these giant black craft with maybe a couple of lights on them that maybe were test flown for whatever above where the people could see them moving very slowly. Huge. If you've ever seen a blimp closely, like you walked out of your house, it's shocking, right? I saw one and I was shocked because I could almost reach up, I thought, and grab the line that they grab, right? And it was shocking, and it wasn't a real big one, and I was like, my heart stopped, like, holy crap. These are way bigger, and I'm wondering where that kind of tech fits into a lot of these stories, because it does exist and it is tested.
Was this a blimp-like craft, or what was the propulsion? What?
Yes, it's blimp-like. It's shaped exactly like if you took a hot dog and you put it into a V shape. It's one big piece. Some have a point, some have a round, and I'm not going to say that they're going to go fast at all, and they're supposedly not that noisy. It's more of for reconnaissance and stuff, I guess, is the reason that they were trying to look into this, right?
Yeah.
But again, if you go up on the web, in fact, if you haven't seen it, I'll put it in our chat here so you can check this out at some other point. And I'm not making any claims here, but I know the tech exists. I know the photos exist. I know they have various the sizes from car shape to football field shape. I'm not an expert at it. But it is interesting that after the Phoenix Lights, almost 20 years, this was finally released. And they were saying we were making these back then. Were they? No clue. I have no clue.
No proof. There's no proof.
Back in the 90s, I personally was told, after these gigantic boomerang-shaped objects and these giant Vs were first being sighted,
right?
Somebody told me that the military was developing these, or were having them developed,
right,
to also carry supplies into war zones.
Right.
Okay, now,
right,
if this thing is that big.
I know that makes no sense unless they're going to drop the stuff.
Yeah, well, I mean, you would think that enemy troops would find that an irresistible target.
Absolutely.
To shoot at.
Absolutely.
But I know I told you this once, Mark, and I'm just going to throw it out. You were talking about seeing a blimp and being shot.
Yeah.
That happened to me about 1990 down in LA proper. And Vicki and I were renting a house down there. And one evening, early evening, maybe, I don't know, 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, I was out in the kitchen and it was a hot evening. And I opened up the door that led out to the driveway and I stepped through it. And suddenly I was confronted with this huge Buck Rogers looking thing in the sky. And if you get the reference to Buck Rogers, if you've ever seen any of those old Buck
Venus
Rogers
rockets.
serials, those rockets. And I saw this thing and literally I was stunned.
Yep.
I couldn't move for a moment. It was like, oh my God. And then I noticed the Goodyear on the side of it. And okay, I'm breathing better now, Goodyear blimp.
It does kind of put it in perspective though, right? That some people say that firsthand accounts by trained people are the best. Some say it isn't. I don't want to get into that. But we both had an account of something that initially freaked us out. Because, I mean, it freaked me out until I saw the rope, and the rope was touching the treetops. And then it didn't take long, seconds. And then and then, of course, I heard the noise when it went in front. But at first, I'm like, oh, my God, come and get me. I'm ready. It just freaked me out, right? So you can see that if a V-shaped balloony thing or whatever, in some instances, going to freak some folks out, or the hoax of those guys who are in the V-shape with the black bottoms and the lights and all that stuff. It does kind of make you sit back and say, so maybe not believe, even trained firsthand, even with the Tic Tac and stuff like that. It's kind of an S show still, right? It's kind of like, well, maybe not. It's very maddening, this subject.
Yeah.
Well, Linda, I want to bounce into your research on cryptids. Now, I got to tell you, way back in the day, I can remember that famous UK Mount Everest climber, Sir Hillary somebody.
Edmund Hillary.
Oh, there you go. Ed,
that's not Hillary Clinton. Come on, Don.
Ed.
Ed. But she did claim that she was named after him.
That's true.
She did claim that.
And
even though he hadn't climbed the mountain yet.
Yeah.
But
he had not climbed the mountain. They wouldn't have known who he was. It was such a bullshit story.
But anyway, he claimed at the time that he saw in the snow some giant footprints of this thing that over there in the Nepal mountains in India and what have you, they called the Yeti. This was before, I think, even before I heard the term Sasquatch or Bigfoot. And like I said, I was a kid then. But anyway, I've heard about Sasquatch, but in recent years, there have been some weird creatures that have been allegedly sighted by a lot of people. I'll tell you one, and I think I asked you about this, Linda, or if not you, somebody else. There was one that particularly gives me the creeps that is called the crawlers. Are you familiar with that?
No, that's a new one. Crawlers.
Oh, they're all over the web. Okay, now they look like something out of a horror movie, but anyway, there have been a heck of a lot of cryptids that have been described. Dogmen. Some have called them werewolves. Of course, the Sasquatch. Other things. But what got you into that? And did you make any discoveries, associations, anything that confirmed your belief that they, in fact, could be real?
Well, certainly during some of my interviews with people, they would also have a cryptid story. And two things that were most interesting. I was out in Pittsburgh at a conference, 20 years ago.
Pennsylvania?
Yeah.
Pittsburgh?
Yeah. And there was some Sasquatch hunters there, and I had, I was curious, but I wasn't doing anything actively. And he said, you're going to think this is crazy, but he said, one morning I'm driving along a fairly secluded road, and he sees what looks like a classic Sasquatch, but he said, I only saw a little sliver of it, as if I was looking through a partially opened door. And this partially opened door went across the road with the Sasquatch behind it, like something interdimensional. And I thought, well, I don't know what to do with this, but I said, that's fascinating. Thanks for sharing. And then fast forward 20 years, and in my own Hudson Valley here, not far from where I live, a man had a case where he said there's this Long Meadow Road in Tuxedo. You name it, weird stuff happens there. And he said he saw a Sasquatch. He said, but I only saw a sliver of it, like a partially open door going across the street. He used almost the same exact words. And I admit at this point, my eyes are bugging out of my head. And he goes, you probably think I'm crazy. I'm like, no, you're the second person. You hear one of those stories and you say, who knows what that is? But when you hear two described in the same way, it's and both very credible people, very credible. I don't know. Have you heard of anything along those lines where they're seeing something through like a slit in space and time?
Skinwalker Ranch.
Oh, really? They had something similar. Okay.
Yeah. Skinwalker Ranch. Well, did that point your investigations in any particular area? And the reason I asked that, when I became officially involved back in this field in 1988, I was firmly convinced at that time that this was a nuts and bolts issue. Okay. And for years I felt that way. But as I continued in my guise as director of research, some of the stuff I've heard over the years boggles the mind. And I began to entertain the thought that perhaps there is something to this interdimensional thing. Okay. And a little more time went along, and I got involved in researching something that apparently of a massive, gigantic scale happened on our planet roughly 11,600 years ago, perhaps 12,000 years ago, the Younger Dryas event, when something reshaped the entire planet and the climate in one fell swoop, apparently. And when that happened, North America especially, and of course Europe, there were millions of megafauna, giant creatures, giant animals, great woolly mammoths, Columbian mammoths, giant diurnal wolves, giant ground sloths, giant bison. All these animals disappeared in a cosmic eye blink. Boom. They were dead. They were gone. Saber-toothed tigers. Something happened. Now, I don't for a second believe that our civilization has been the only one. When I was in high school, when I was in college, okay, it was being taught that Mesopotamia was the first civilization, that somehow 6,000 years ago in ancient Sumeria, the plains of Mesopotamia suddenly blew up with cities all over. Cities that for the time were wildly advanced. They had mathematics. They had a timekeeping system. They had advanced agricultural technologies and pursuits. They had the beginnings of many things, including medicine.
And writing.
Well, of course, the writing. They were being touted as the first civilization. And they suddenly popped up with all of these amazing, gifts from where? Well, according to their records, they were presented with these arts, the arts of civilization, by a group of beings they called the Anunnaki, those who from heaven to earth came. Now, before Younger Dryas happened, I have no doubt, and I'm not saying they were as advanced technologically as we are today, but then again, who knows? But there was an advanced civilization there. And if you go into any of the mythologies, and I have quite a few, when people got through this tremendous event, suddenly they talked about people coming from the sea. And this is not just one place. This is a number of different mythological accounts with the arts of civilization that these beings were teaching them. They were also called the Shiny Ones. Now, when you think about that, then you think, well, if there was another human advanced civilization, what if they foresaw this event that was coming and they had the capability somehow of leaving the planet until the aftermath and then coming back? And there are a lot of stories that people then went underground. Have you ever heard any of those stories, Linda?
Isn't that the Hopi tradition as well?
They certainly talked about it. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. But I'm talking about Homo sapiens sapiens that had been advanced, that came back when. Well, in other words, the point that I was making is I suddenly went from nuts and bolts to nuts and bolts, possibly interdimensional, and possibly then the remnants of a lost civilization. So I personally find three possibilities of where some of this tech might have emanated from. You see what I'm saying?
Sure. I don't know that we have enough information to take anything off the table. Certainly there are craft that are nuts and bolts. There's no two way, they knock off tree limbs and they crush things when they land. So, and people have shot
radiation.
Yes. And I did a whole episode of my podcast of people shooting at them and hearing the bullets ricocheting, off the craft. So
that's a hell of a way to meet somebody with advanced technology, let me tell you. Shooting at them? What a moron.
Oh, many people have done it. Many people have done it. So yes, it's absolutely nuts and bolts. But when I hear someone tell me that there's a craft that kind of shrunk into a little dot and disappeared, okay, or there's something, like the Sasquatch in a little slit, and something suddenly appears and changes shape and disappears. There's a lot going on, and maybe it's just physics we don't understand, but certainly it can be interdimensional as well. And then, as you said, previous civilizations, I think they're absolutely, we have, look at Göbekli Tepe, people were supposed to be just subsistence hunter-gatherers, and they built these incredible monuments. So not saying they had high tech or anything, but certainly they had the brain power. They had the knowledge of astronomy. They had the ability to move large rocks, work together. And I'm sure they're, once the ice age ended and water levels rose, I think there's a lot of things to find on former coastlines of civilizations that were probably fairly well advanced that are now underwater.
I just got a notification from El Producer Jefe Supremo that we got to go to break. So we're going to go to break, ladies and gentlemen, and when we come back, more with my very special, and we're honored to have her, Ms. Linda Zimmermann. And we got another whole segment coming up. Stick around.
From Iraq and Afghanistan, our brave warriors are coming home, wounded. Some with wounds you can see, some with wounds you can't see. Wounded Warrior Project was created to support our men and women coming off the battlefield. Please help carry these warriors the rest of the way home. Get involved at woundedwarriorproject.org.
MUFON is the voice of thousands of like-minded people who want to see change. We speak up against UFO secrecy. We engage governments and agencies around the world on the topic. We share information with the public through our journal, website, newsletter, social media, and even our own TV channel. When you join MUFON, you add your voice to the cause. Few things are more important in our time than understanding the UFO question. Join MUFON. Find your friends.
And we're back. I just looked. My hair is still holding up, Gerry. So far, it hasn't gotten mussed too
Looking
much.
good, man. You look good. You look good.
So we were talking about some crazy stuff. People shooting at
Yeah, and immediately the first thing
UFOs.
that pops into my head is the Hopkinsville encounter with the little goblin aliens, and there are definitely guns involved with that one.
Yes, but it wasn't just an arbitrary thing. Oh, look, there's a strange machine of some kind. Let's shoot it. No,
Right.
these guys had a reason, okay, to shoot these little guys that were jumping around. And by the way, it didn't do any damn good. All right.
No, because it didn't hurt them at all.
No, it didn't seem to hurt them at all. But anyway, yeah. Now, Linda, one thing, and I always like to try to point this out if I'm in a position to do so. There are actually, by all accounts, two distinct types of Bigfoot or Sasquatch creatures, types of creatures.
Toads and yep.
There's the five-toed, which seem to be much more natural, if you can, and then the three-toed variety, which are often associated with UFO sightings, which would suggest, no proof, but suggest that they are somehow, the three-toed variety of these creatures are somehow connected to the UFOs. Have you discovered that in your research?
I have not seen their feet. I do not. Yeah, I don't know. We do have a Sasquatch researcher in the Hudson Valley. I will have to ask her because, you know, they do find footprints and take plaster casts. I couldn't speak to that.
Okay. There's no doubt about it. There have been many reports over the last few decades about that, which is a very unusual thing. Now, I've also come across in the course of my research and investigations some alleged happenings where people out in the woods, usually hunters, and if they're out hunting in the woods, primarily for big game like deer or elk or something like that, which means that they have some type of high-powered rifle. But I've heard of accounts where, for whatever reason, people have run into a Bigfoot. There have been a few cases where people have fired their weapons at the Bigfoot, and they don't seem to have the kind of effect you would want. Have you come across that?
Nobody I've interviewed has shot at one. Of course, I've heard cases and the dog man too, where they'll, 357 Magnum shoot them right in the chest, and they seem to shrug it off. So, but no one I have interviewed has taken a shot at one.
What would you, if true, what would you attribute that to? That would open up to me a whole realm of possibilities. If 357 Magnum revolver, providing you're shooting Magnum cartridges, not 38s, because they'll also shoot 38s, which is not nearly as powerful. Something to take a hit or a couple of hits from a 357, if they don't go down, that tells me there's possibilities of all kinds of trouble.
Yeah, I think that speaks to the interdimensionality, possibly, because how many times have there been cases of Bigfoot where they're following the footprints and they just stop in the middle of a field? Something bizarre is going on. I have a different cryptid story that from a woman I did interview. I don't know if you've heard of this kind of creature. There's an area called Magnetic Mine Road in Brewster, New York, where there was lot of UFO sightings. There's a lot of craft going in and out of the many lakes in the area. But this magnetic mine road was near an old, there's a lot of iron mines, which had very high pure magnetite levels, so magnetic fields. She was a nurse, night shift, driving home on this dark, not well kept road. And she said there's a little creature in the short, she didn't see any clothes on it, kind of grayish, kind of, she doesn't know. She said kind of like a naked Yoda, which is not an image I want in my head. You know, grayish, wrinkled. It stops and looks up at her and hisses, and she's like terrified. Then the thing continues across the road, and there's a big rock there, big like cliff face. It goes into the rock, not a hole in the rock. It goes into the rock. And that is classic Pukwudgie activity. Are you familiar with the Pukwudgies? That is a Native American thing in the Northeast here. And they're mischief makers. And one of the things they're known for is coming in and out of rock, out of solid rock. And there's two other witnesses to a Pukwudgie type creature. And are you familiar with the Bridgewater Triangle area of Massachusetts?
I've heard of it.
Right. A local law enforcement, they kind of as a joke, but there's so many of these sightings, they put up a Pukwudgie crossing sign in one of the areas. So kind of the other end of the extreme, the anti-Bigfoot, but these have been seen by Native Americans for a long time, and particularly even out in the Midwest, that around ancient Native American mound sites, Pukwudgie sightings have been seen at those locations as well. So there's a tie-in with ancient sites and Native Americans right up until modern day in this area.
Well, I originally am from central western Pennsylvania. And where I grew up, we were only, my parents' home, we were only a mile and a half, 2 miles from part of the old Kintanning Trail or Kintanning Warpath, which it was Native American. Native Americans originally used it for hunting and war parties, what have you. Very hot spot during the French-Indian conflict in the 1750s, early 1760s. And I used to go up and I would hike that thing for miles, okay? It came supposedly, and I'm sure it's true, down from New York through Pennsylvania, and you could, when at its heyday, you could travel all the way down to the Carolinas on this thing. Now, the natives had legends about another creature. And I heard about this, many, many moons ago, something called the Wendigo. Mm-hmm. Have you ever heard of that?
Yes, that's not a good creature, right? Isn't that very deadly?
Yes.
Wendigo? Mm-hmm.
Yes, very bad. I was wondering if you ever heard anything about that from your research, the people you've investigated and researched.
Fortunately, no. Hope not to. They do seem to be benign, whatever strange cryptids we have in this area.
Have you had any inordinate number of people that have gone inexplicably missing?
No, one or two, I would say, over a long course of time, but no, not like happens at the state parks supposedly and things like that. Lots of missing time, but we're talking a few hours, not gone for good.
No, you're lucky in that respect. Well,
Yes.
don't you have any state or national parks or forests? My wife and I live right off of the Angeles National Forest.
Mm-hmm.
Literally, I can go up behind where I'm sitting right now, and that's east going this way. I can go back up there and look right into it. Now, we've never heard anything amiss like that. But over the years, I will say this, it's been unfortunately an area where dead bodies have been deposited, murder victims. But
we had
nothing.
that too, because I grew up in Rockland County, which was about half an hour north of New York City, very suburban, parts rural. But for a time, mostly in the 70s, the mafia found it a great dumping ground for their murder victims. They'd come up from the city, push it out of the car, the body out of the car, be back in time for dinner. So yeah, we were a body dump area for quite a while.
Right. Yeah. Well, actually, I'd rather be faced with that than a crawler or a Wendigo.
Yeah. Now, what is a crawler?
Well, I got two guys here while I'm doing this. Can you find a picture of that, Gerry or Mark?
Humanoid, animal?
Humanoid.
Okay.
I think Gary's looking right now.
Images. Oh, geez, those guys. Looks like something from a nightmare. Cryptids of the world. Holy crap, that is horrifying. All right, I'm going to share the image here. Present your screen. Yep, there we go. Now sharing it.
Nope.
Seeing it.
Well, I can't share it. Bill has to share it.
Oh.
I'm sharing it so Bill can share it. Bill. Oh, Baggins.
Bill, are you on a smoke break? By God, get on the
show,
here,
I'm doing a show.
Well, what do these crawlers do? Do they hurt people?
Yeah, they've been blamed for that. Usually, in the accounts that I've read, they've just scared the bejesus out of people. But there have been a few accounts where they've interfered with people. But
can you edit, Don? Are you able to edit?
No. No, they took my ability away.
So
it's my show, but they won't let me do it.
So let's get a view on something fresh off the stove. Your view on the current disclosure process, the current issues in Congress with the biologics, and yes, people have been murdered, but we can't tell you who, what, where, or when, and all this glad handing that's been going on for a few years now.
I'm happy this is coming before Congress, but show me the evidence.
There you go, Don. Don, there you go.
Oh, there's the
crawler.
That's okay. That's not good. I would be terrified.
That's supposedly from a night vision camera.
I think I've seen that in a movie.
Yeah.
I think I dated it in high school.
Yeah. The congressional things, I'm sure it's possible, but I don't want to hear, I heard it from somebody who heard it from somebody. And it's not going to come out until somebody opens the archives. So clearly, if Congress wanted the truth to come out, or the government wanted the truth to come out, it would be out.
You know, about a year ago, Linda, I wrote a paper on the disclosure process. Did I send that to you?
No.
Well, I'm going to rectify that immediately following the show. And I'll tell you, I've come down to the conclusion, and believe me, it's been all these years of talk. I've talked to people within government, without government, NASA, skeptics, you name it. We butted heads all across the board. And I knew a fellow who was tied into the intelligence community, the IC, okay? And he ended up writing a number of books. His name is Gerry Beckham, Bekkum. His books are available on Amazon, okay? There's 4 of them. I've got all 4 books. And I've interviewed Gerry, 5 or 6 times over the years. He knew all the principals. People like Hal Puthoff, Kit Green, Ron Pandolfi, you name it, at one point or another, he's been involved with all of those guys. And the bottom line is, he came out with the suggestion, and I believe him, that there is a core secret to the overall phenomenon that probably was stumbled upon in the aftermath of Roswell back in 1947. And there were, of course, many other incidents, but it was something that allegedly terrified upper echelons in the military. And as a result, this core secret was limited to very, very few people, and it's surrounded by a special access program. In other words, unless you're in what they call the bigot list, okay, and have a need to know, you never will. And I'm convinced they will take whatever that secret is to the grave with them, okay? Now, with that being said, I see this disclosure movement, a lot of people basically fooling themselves with what's ultimately going to happen. Granted, starting in December 2017, yeah, we got a lot more from the federal government than we've ever gotten before. Harry Reid, before his death, came out and had a presser where he talked about basically he and several other congressional leaders got together roughly $22 million to fund the ATIP program. Now, we still don't know what the real story is with that at the Pentagon. We still don't know the actual facts regarding people like Luis Elizondo and others. The bottom line is, I think this is a grand dog and pony show, smoke and mirrors, okay? I watched those congressional hearings, and when David Grush said, when he was asked, has anybody ever been harmed or killed encountering these unknown anomalous objects? He said, yes, but I can't talk about it publicly. No follow-up question at all from none of the congressional people.
Why can't you talk about it?
Yeah.
And what you're telling me that people have died in the pursuit of this, and you can't talk about it? Not a word, not a peep. Did the press cover it? Hell no. So I am convinced this is always going to remain hidden. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I completely agree. I'm sure there is a core group somewhere who knows a lot. But yeah, why should they? If it's something that needs to remain secret, they're not going to let it out.
By whose criteria, though?
Their own. Their, whatever group this is.
Where's the oversight? There is none.
There is none. There is none. So
well, the only way it's really going to come out, and I always tell this to Don and this guy over here, is that if we have Will Smith Independence Day inexplicable thing happen where Don picks up the paper and goes, "That's not a blimp this time," then they can't stop it, right? They can't stop it. But as long as we're confusing the issue with drones, and I'm not saying that there wasn't shenanigans there, but it's a convenient way to confuse the issue. And we're having these meetings with certain players in the game behind Grush, right? And you know who I'm talking about, with their smiles on their faces. Grush is saying what he's saying, and no new information is coming out, and chandeliers and flying octopi and all of this other stuff. The only way this is going to happen is for another country to do it in an inexplicable way, or the phenomenon to do it in an inexplicable. This isn't some sort of technology that drones that they're making the face of Yoda in the sky or something, right? Inexplicable. We cannot discount what's going on here, right?
Yeah, I don't need government disclosure. I know what I've seen. I know the thousands of people I've talked to. It's a real thing, and it has been for centuries. So I don't need the government's permission to believe what I know is already true.
Yeah, we talked about that, and we had John Brandenburg on, and we talked about remote viewing. And John, to some extent, wants the information from the CIA or NASA or whomever has done remote viewing, right? And I'm of the mind, I don't need that. Remote viewers exist. Remote viewers are alive. Go grab some of them and do your own test. You don't need that data, right? You don't need that data, much in the same way you do your own research. You don't need the data of government or whatever for you to come up to at least, if not conclusions, very strong guesses, okay? That's part of the problem with the subject, though, is that we have very smart people who either don't want to be bothered or don't have the time. They're getting older, whatever. But it is interesting that a lot of people think, oh, well, it's got to come from the people who are holding the secret. What?
And you expect them to not lie to you?
Right.
Yeah, I'm in recent years, I've gotten really into the whole JFK assassination, and what I see the government capable of hiding and doing. Translate that into UFOs, translate that into biological experiments, whatever you want.
Into fluoride.
It's not surprising they can do things and hold secrets for generations. That's what.
Well, I go back to the mid 1990s, and Hazel O'Leary was the director of, was it the Atomic Energy Commission, something? It's been a long time ago. I'm getting older, so. So anyway, but a news story broke. Clinton authorized the release of this, that in the 1940s, in the aftermath of the end of the Second World War, we, of course, used 2 nuclear devices on Japan to end the war. Hiroshima and Nagasaki, for a while anyway, ceased to exist. We nuked them. So people wanted to see, people in government wanted to see, well, gee, this radiation business, this is pretty weird. We got to do some testing. And do you know what these SOBs did? They took mentally challenged children, and fed them plutonium in their milk to see what effects they would have. And in the 1950s, they had above ground nuclear tests with troops on the foe battlefields. And after the devices were detonated, they marched soldiers, American soldiers, into the radiation zone to see if they could operate. Now, years later, those people were dying of cancers and leukemia. And who the hell did they have to complain to? This is why, when it comes to the federal government these days, I don't believe damn near anything they tell me, okay? Because I've seen it at its worst. Hey, I'm a Vietnam vet. Right before I was wounded in April of 1972, I was up on the demilitarized zone. And you know what they were telling the American people? And you'd have to look at a map to see what I'm saying. That there were no American troops above the city of Da Nang. Well, Bubba, I was at the very pointy, sharp tip of that damn spear. I could literally get up and look on the top of my bunker into North Vietnam. And they were telling the public that all those guys were gone. They lie. Why? I guess because they can. That, by the way, was my mini rant tonight. So
yeah, there you go. So, Linda, in your research and such, I ask everybody this question. So you can either respond as a joke, right, which gets you off the hook, or not. I've been going under this deep, deep, dark crevices of we didn't go to the moon and flat Earth, and it interests me because of the instant gratification of information that we have now, right? Instant. I go on to Amazon and I see your zombie books, and I'm a huge, huge film fan. And then, of course, I have to ask you later, have the dirtbags in Hollywood or somewhere said we want to make a movie of those books. But we can talk about that later because I know what they did to Don in his vampire book, which is just string him along, and he gave up. But I guess a better way to put it is, how do you feel, whether you believe it or not, how do you feel that there are hundreds of thousands of people out there who work at the bank and work at the store and work in the sewer, and they're airplane pilots and the whole gambit, and a lot of them don't believe we went to the moon and the Earth is flat? In this day and age, as a researcher, I find this incongruous, Don. Come on.
It's astonishing, the level of ignorance. There was, I think it was Seneca, the Roman, who said, future generations will marvel at our ignorance. And that is just as true today. I was never as happy as when Buzz Aldrin punched that idiot who accused him of not going to the moon. Yeah. Form a line. I'd like to take a swing as well.
How dare you lie about going to the moon? You know,
but Linda, all of this information that's available now, granted, that's out there too. I understand that. But the preponderance and the decades of information and the quality brains that have talked about this stuff, and yet I'm besides myself that so many people believe in this kind of stuff.
My husband and I were at a street fair years ago, and there was a creationist group, they were trying to give little dinosaur cookies to little kids to lure them in to tell them that the earth was, 5,000 years old. And I started to go towards it. And my husband's literally holding me, and I'm shouting, there's something called science, you ought to look into it. And he's like,
no cookies for you, Linda. No cookies
no
for
cookies
you.
for me. He was afraid I was going to go medieval on them. Yeah, I have no tolerance for that.
Yeah, I just, I mean, there's stuff like Don talks about the archaeological stuff, and that's at least got some stuff you can put your fingers on and go test and go look at and all that, right? But I mean, even like this new thing with the power cells below the pyramid. Now, I'm not going to say that maybe there isn't something there, but even a cursory look into that doesn't deserve anything more at this point, in my opinion. I'm looking at it going, well, the technology you use doesn't even work for what you say you did here. So let's use that technology to look in the jungles. And they've done that, and they show some amazing things in the coverage of the jungle. Well, yeah, it'll work there, but it ain't going to go 2 miles underneath the ground.
You're talking about LiDAR, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, and there's a couple of more too that I forget right now that are similar to that, but it's just a real problem that we have this stuff right. I mean, I can go buy all your books right now. We never. And
she'd like that if you did, Mark.
I'm sure.
She'd really like
listening.
that.
Everybody listening, do the same.
We never
Amazon, right, Linda? Amazon.
Amazon.
That's right. And we're all talking on this technology and stuff, and yet we have the more proliferation of conspiracies now than ever before. It's just, boy, it makes you just want to throw up your hands and say, man, I don't want to leave the house.
Scary.
It makes me stop interacting with people. That's why, like on Twitter, because I spend a lot of time on Twitter, I hang out with Red and Manny and talk to those guys and the people they know. And they tend to be a little more grounded type people, which I like. I feel comfortable around them. I'm kind of comfortable with Mark too.
I don't know, Gary. I don't know.
So
I'm lying. I work for the government.
So if you had to point to a couple of cases, which ones would you point to? You're pretty self-assured that there was something else off-world that was going on there.
Are you?
I don't mean you. I mean
Linda.
Yes, the guest.
Our guest, Gerry. Our guest.
Yes. I would say there was a case in 1992 in Cornwall, New York, where people are coming out. It's a beautiful summer evening, and everybody's running out because they're hearing all this commotion and, typical suburban streets. And there's a UFO so close over the top of somebody's house, they thought it was going to crush the house. And 90% of the people saw a circular, classic saucer, lights all around, drew sketches of it. The animals, which is another thing I look into, the animal reactions. The animals are terrified. So it was not nothing. The animal reactions. But 10% of the witnesses saw that craft as a solid black triangle with a single light in each corner. And they're standing shoulder to shoulder and saying, what do you mean it's a circular craft? It's a black triangle. To this day, 30 years later, the people are still arguing. I've interviewed several of them. And to me, that is something, I don't know that we have the technology to project in your mind. Maybe we do, but in 92 over a small suburban town, that it was either of them correct? Was it something totally different? And not to be flippant about it, but you're not supposed to touch both buttons. Either the triangle or the disc. So it's something about perception, and whatever these craft, what kind of fields they're putting out that can alter your perception. And I have so many cases where there's two guys who are in Pine Bush, and a lot of the activity comes out of the ground, which is very unusual. One saw something spiraling out of the ground, like he described it, like a Ferris wheel on fire. The other one said he saw something coming out of the ground. It looked like an illuminated 2x4, a giant 2x4. Now, how does this happen? There's something beyond. There are nuts and bolts, but there's some sort of reaction going on, which to me means something very profound and highly unusual is going on in cases like that.
Well, I got two short little stories about perception. Right after the Bob Lazar story broke, where he went by his own name, not the very first special that George Knapp did, but the second one, all right, when he identified himself by his real name. I went down to Las Vegas, actually on a couple of occasions, to his home. I interviewed him in his home. And one thing that I was, at the time, and this is years ago now, I was fascinated by was the purported ability of UFOs to be in a position, and people over here on that side couldn't see a thing, but people over on this side could. Okay? In other words, depending upon where you were, these objects had the ability to be invisible. Now, that's something. Cloaked. Yeah, that's something that our own military right now has, believe it or not, some very advanced technology they've been working on now for years. How do you make a vehicle, for example, disappear, or an infantryman in the bush disappear? And they've got stuff right now they're working on to do that very thing. Well, Lazar told me that because, the way he described it, I'm not saying I believe this, all right, but I'm just relaying the information. It depends upon what the UFO is doing and the gravity. They have a gravity drive that can move the thing just in the blink of an eye, but light is suspended around the craft. In other words, if you're directly beneath it and you look up, you can see it. But if you're off to the side, the light bending around the object makes it invisible. So that's one. Now, at that time, Area 51 was the gift that never stopped giving, okay? People going out by the so-called black mailbox, which incidentally wasn't black, it was white. But out there, my wife and I, as a matter of fact, were featured speakers when Independence Day came out in '96. The then governor of Nevada, renamed that highway, 375, as the ET Highway. And we were both asked to go out and to speak at that event, which we ended up doing. But people would come to me with stories about Area 51. And I'll never forget, it's two guys that incidentally I did know, okay, because of the magazine, had traveled out there. They were by the so-called black mailbox. It was in the evening. And suddenly, off to the side of the road, a 6-foot-tall Wile E. Coyote from the Roadrunner cartoons popped up, okay, on the side of the road.
Yeah, a little bit.
Kid you not. No, well, they might have been smoking
strong.
Yeah, and I did some check because I thought that was so ludicrous. They can't be serious, right? But it was so ludicrous, I thought this can't be real. But then I discovered that the military had been working on 3D projections of things, okay? And the only thing I could go, if these guys weren't zoned out of their minds, okay, because they had too much ganja, man, maybe this was a demonstration of that because it was right there where Area 51 is.
Yeah.
So we got a
coyote.
How
would you like to have that? You're out driving at night on a lonely desert road.
So we have a question, and it's, what do we, or the guest, think about the U.S. science director saying that America Tech can manipulate time and space? It came out last week.
They built a TARDIS?
Yeah, maybe give us proof. Show us a demonstration.
Yeah, it's interesting to say that.
It's a bold statement.
It is
to back it.
There you go. I can make all sorts of bold statements, but what was it? The Skunk Works guy. We have the ability to bring ET home.
Ben Rich.
Yeah, show me what it is you have. Don't make
screenwriting. Show, don't tell.
Yeah. But I would like to, when you said what proves that this was not government, I think I should go back to that wave around 1909 when people were seeing massive craft that could hover, go extremely fast, had big searchlights on them, and in 1909, there were no airplanes flying at night. The Wilbur Wright had set an elevation record of 361 feet. And these craft were some of them at thousands of feet. And they were seen for years all over. And there was no Skunk Works then. There were no government black projects. So that sets the precedent that there were these objects in the sky years before we, even had a whiff of technology like that.
Right. There, the case that I love, and it's an older case, and you could comment on that or pick your own case from around that time period, is the Zamora case. I just love that case because it's totally unanswered. The guy seemed to be a quality person, and there's just no answer. And something happened. It wasn't made up. I mean,
right.
Just crazy case.
Yeah, that's one of the better ones. Absolutely.
Don brought something up a little bit ago about guys disappearing on the combat field, and it's actually something that the U.S. military, and I know they're working on it, is using carbon nanotubes to hold nano mirrors in order to create this. It's almost like a thin fabric that it's like a ghillie suit that reflects the area around you, and that's all you see. You don't see the person. You see reflected stuff. And this has been experimented on for the last 15 years that I know about. And God only knows how advanced it's gotten. I mean, at this point, they have to have these things because we already use nanotubes on the outsides of spaceships for protection.
Right.
They're literally like one of the strongest things you can make, these nano chains. It's like impervious chainmail.
Right.
It's crazy.
So what are you going to be talking at Pine Bush? What's your main thing you're going to be doing?
Yeah, my topic is basically abductions from summer camps and people who are camping.
Like children?
Yeah. It happens disturbingly often.
Well, I know that one child that he was not where he was supposed to be, and then suddenly he's where they find him where they've already searched.
Yeah.
It was one of those 411 file stories.
Right.
That
Yeah.
kid survived.
Yeah, but far too many kids get a little more than they bargained for summer camp. So,
did you guys all see that story about a week ago about that little 2 or 3-year-old boy that apparently wandered off from his home? This kid wandered approximately 6 or 7 miles. When his parents realized he was gone, they went out looking for him, couldn't find him, started calling up neighbors and friends. And the police, of course, had a massive search, didn't find the little boy. And they had gone out a few miles. Now, you think a 2 or 3-year-old, really, can they wander that far away? But a guy's farm dog, whom they use as a protector of his livestock from things like coyotes, was out making a sweep around the property, apparently saw this child. The dog ran up to a big news story about this and ended up cuddling the little boy all night long so he wouldn't freeze. And the next day, the dog kind of pointed him back toward his mommy and daddy's house, the farmer. And they got the kid and he was fine. Did you guys see that story?
No,
I haven't heard that one.
It's funny because in a place like I live in suburbia, and there was a kid a few years ago, and I'm driving out to do whatever I'm doing, and he's just walking around, and he's like 3 or 4. So I stopped, but I know I'm smart enough not to go close to him, and I'm like, where do you live? Where are your parents and all that? And then from around the corner, somebody walks down, maybe the babysitter or whatever, right? So it's interesting that you would probably have to be in the middle of nowhere for that to happen. Because generally, if you're in a place like I live, or even you, Don, well, pretty quickly, somebody's going to be driving by and going, wait a minute. What's this kid out here for? That's a very interesting story that he could get.
That's why I live out in the country, because I want to be abducted.
Well.
Go to summer camp.
Yes.
Before we go, I used to drive. I lived in Virginia, grew up in Virginia, and I used to drive out on country roads just to see if I could ever see a UFO. I've never seen one.
Yeah,
and it's always bothered me. And
I
told
thought
Don
I'd seen
want to
them.
be abducted. And Don says, careful what you wish for. You might not like that so much. Okay.
The last time I thought I saw one, and I'm like freaking out, and I go in and I call up Don. I saw a chain of Starlinks, but I never saw that before, so I was wigging out, man. Whoosh, going across.
That is the bane of a researcher's existence. I wish I had $1 for everybody who sent me pictures or video of a Starlink. And it amazes me how many people still haven't heard of it.
Oh yeah, and it looked like a train of lights, and it's moving across.
It's very
and
impressive.
I'm like going, "Oh my God, Don! I've been accepted in the club." And then I go onto my phone, and that's what I saw.
So I'm not the only one who's never seen a UFO, then, Mark. I didn't know that about you. I thought you'd seen one.
No. As far as I know.
Don, why are we associating with these people?
I don't know. I
we're uninitiated. We're unbaptized.
I wish you had told me that before the show. I just
And here's a guy that wanted to be abducted. I mean, God.
That's right. So
I will tell you this: I have done the artwork, production artwork, and posters for 2 UFO films, Kecksburg movie, and for the still yet to be finished Hopkinsville story. I backed out of that one because he changed it from alien to religious, and I went, I'm out.
So have they approached you to make any of your books, especially the zombie books, into something for the screen?
No, I'm outraged. They have not. Nobody has approached me about a zombie.
Have you submitted them?
No, I know what it's like trying to, if somebody comes across it someday and says,
Oh,
wow,
yeah.
that's good.
Linda, let me tell you, I've had 3 production companies come to me and tell me they loved my novel so much they wanted to do a film project.
Mhm.
The first one wanted to tie me up for 3 years by giving me $1.
That's right.
Okay, and I laughed him
$1?
right out of the
And
room.
Vin Diesel was going to play Don Ecker.
Yeah, Vin
I
Diesel.
found the actor that should play Don Ecker, and he's in that movie that just came out, Neighborhood Watch.
Jeffrey
Dean
Dean
Losers.
Morgan.
Yeah, Jeffrey Dean Morgan, because he is you in that fucking movie, and I just laughed my ass off just picturing. Yeah,
Don's
Don
a little
Ecker.
more sexy than Jeffrey Dean Morgan. Well, come on.
Well, the second guy that came to me was the producer of that anime movie years ago called Vampire Hunter D.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and he was hot to trot. My friend, I had an A actor buddy, okay, that talked to this guy about it. And this guy he said, oh my God, he said the dialogue in that book was just sparkling. And then he got sick and everything fell under the floorboards. The third guy, okay, I'm not going to mention his name, but I guess you could look it up if you wanted to, was the second movie about what the hell was it called? The housing development built on the old cemetery.
Oh, the
Poltergeist?
Yeah.
Poltergeist. The second Poltergeist. We got so far as they sent me the paperwork. I signed it, waiting for him to get back to me. He never did. Never. Okay. Never a word as to why. And so my point is the disappointment. Hollywood will murder you with hope.
Rat bastards.
My wife is over here and she said, it's hope. It's hope. So, yeah. So be glad they didn't tickle you.
I did the graphic novel Code Word Geronimo for IDW Publishing, created it, drew it, and we got approached by this production company to do the film. And because I won't say the name of the agency, but they were involved with The Walking Dead, because they weren't allowed to be an executive on the film, we got rejected and didn't get any money, and they still made the movie, and that's the movie they made, and it's a piece of shit. It's so bad. It's got a good actor in it. That's the guy that plays in Star Trek Strange New Worlds as the Captain Pike. And it was just a terrible movie, badly done.
Well, real quick, if you're into movies, Linda, and you haven't seen The Accountant, go watch The Accountant and then either wait for The Accountant Part 2 or go see it. Freaking great.
Oh, I love
Linda.
The Accountant, and then the second
part
one.
2 might even be better.
Okay.
That's what Martin just said to me today. He said, I think it's much better.
It's very funny. Very funny.
Gang, we are now officially
out of time.
Linda, this has been a delight to have you on. I'd love to have you come back. This has been really great. I know you've got a ton of stories that we'd love to hear. So I'm going to ask, please keep in touch. And gang, Mark, Gerry, as always, guys, thank you so much. And that's it for this week. Ladies and gentlemen, on Thursday, UAP Crossfire, we're going to have a special show to talk about Earl Grey Anderson, who just unfortunately passed away yesterday. And it's going to be in remembrance of him. So in the meantime, have a great week, and we'll see you next time.
God bless Sam and Dean Winchester.
Amen.